If you've got your Pearson Edexcel IGCSE English Literature Paper 2, now this is the Modern Drama and Literary Heritage Text exam coming up soon, and you're a little bit worried, anxious, or you're panicking about what the paper looks like or what you need to do, then this video is exactly for you. I'm going to walk you through the entire paper. I'm going to give you some hints and tips along the way from an examiner point of view, and I'll show you what the mark scheme is expecting. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I've again selected a paper from 2024. It doesn't really matter what year it's from in recent times because the format is usually always the same. An important point to make is this exam is 1 hour and 30 minutes, so it's actually amongst one of the shorter English exams that you might sit. And there's actually quite a bit to do within that time, although there is only the 2 sections. So this is modern drama, and you will have studied one of these texts, and there is the literary heritage text. Now it's important to say that you only answer the question on the text that you've studied. As an examiner, as a teacher of many, many years, I have seen students who have attempted a question on a text that they haven't actually studied in class. On rare occasions, it might be that the student has read one of the other texts, but they haven't actually studied it in any great depth or detail. So why you would choose a high-risk strategy of answering a question on it under exam conditions, I'm not entirely sure. I would only always ever answer the question on the text that I've spent probably weeks, if not months, studying with my class teacher. So depending on your centre, depending on your school or college, you would find the text relevant to the one you've studied, the one that looks familiar to you. I know that occasionally under the stress of exams, students will panic when they see this entire list. You don't need to worry. If any of these texts look unfamiliar to you, it's because you won't have studied them. So this is a walkthrough video. I'm not going to revise any of these texts necessarily. If you want me to do that, then drop me a comment below and I'm happy to make future content. For the benefit of what I'm talking through, for example, my centre, we tend to study an inspector calls. That's quite a popular one. So if I was a student answering this particular paper, I would only look for the question or the question options on page 4. But it might well be that you've done a view from the bridge, curious incident, or any of the others. So you are only answering one question from this and one question from this cluster here. So again, depending on your centre, you may have studied Romeo and Juliet, you might have done Macbeth, Merchant of Venice, Pride and Prejudice, Great Expectations, and so on. Remember, the modern drama texts are those that have been written in the last 100 years or so. The literary heritage are the older texts, so they tend to be 400 or 500 years, or within that time span, however old that might be. So you would go to the question selection, and you will always get a question selection of 2 on whichever text you've studied. So if this was one of my students, they would go to the inspector calls. And again, there is a reminder, you are either doing the first option or the second option. The clue is in those words. Please don't do both. Again, I know that seems a really rather obvious thing to say, but I have seen occasions where students have done both. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe they think they're going to impress the examiner by doing that, but they don't. There isn't enough time to do both, or to do both well. You are given 45 minutes, so obviously with this being a 1 hour 30-minute paper, you are advised to spend equal amounts of time, 45 minutes on each question. In this case, you either had the Burlings place more importance on their family name than on relationships with each other. So that would be a thematic kind of question, discuss the significance of family. Or this is a character-based question. How far do you agree with the view that Gerald shows that he is selfish in the play? That line there will always be fixed on any particular text or any particular question. You must consider language, form, and structure in your answer. So that is you talking about your understanding of this being a play. Try to avoid talking about any of the characters, for example, as if they are real people. You need to be talking about them as constructs from the writer, the playwright's mind, and you need to talk about plays as being performance pieces in front of an audience and what the audience response and reaction to these pieces would be. So that would be your form, your understanding of these being plays. Language features or literary devices, language devices, or wherever you can see the writer is manipulating a whole host of language devices for whatever effect that might be. And structure, typically this is how the piece begins, how it develops, how it ends. So if you're tracking a character, for example, where do we meet the character? What are their key plot points throughout the course of the narrative? And then how does that character maybe end up at the end? If you're answering a theme question, how is that theme presented at the beginning? How does it develop in the middle part of the play? How is the audience left with that theme by the end? 30 marks. So a couple of things to point out from the mark scheme. I just highlighted that statement there. I'll show you the mark scheme for this particular question in a moment, but it does say, and this is the notes to the examiner, it's possible for an answer to be constructed without mentioning some or all of the indicative content. So for example, and you might want to pause the screen to have a look at this. Those are all the items that you could have been mentioning in a response to one of the questions on an inspector calls for AO1, AO2. I'll talk about the assessment objectives in a moment. But this is indicative content. Whilst the examiner will have read and synthesized that, and that will be in their mind to look for in your answer, if anything you have said sits outside of that, then it will still possibly be mark-worthy if it's a valid response. So it's the examiner's responsibility to apply professional judgment to the candidate's response in determining if the answer fulfills the requirements of the question. If what you have said makes sense, if it answers the question, even if it doesn't neatly fit into the indicative content of the mark scheme, it should still get you marks. So that's an important point to make. For the modern drama, you are getting assessed in 2 assessment objectives, which I've highlighted there. So for 30 marks, the examiner will be looking to apportion about 15 marks for AO1 and about 15 marks for AO2. AO1 is how close your knowledge and understanding has been demonstrated in your answer. Are you able to maintain a critical style? Are you presenting an informed personal engagement? Remember, this is English literature. So I always promote the idea with my students that personal response, personal engagement is everything. The examiner wants to see what you have thought and felt about the text that you've studied. So AO1 is your opportunity to talk about what the piece is about and to show how clear and detailed and close your knowledge and understanding of that piece is. How well do you know those characters? How clearly and closely do you understand the plot points of that narrative? How closely have you studied theme? And that's your AO1 for up to 15 out of the 30 marks. Assessment objective 2 is the language, the form and the structure. So going back to that fixed line there, they are looking for you to show your knowledge and understanding of literary devices, language devices, how you understand the form of this being a modern play, how the writer has manipulated characters, themes to have an intended effect on an audience. What have they made an audience, which includes you, think or feel throughout this work? And that's for up to another 15 marks out of the 30. So if you want the fullest marks, level 5, look at the language, assured knowledge, perceptive critical style. There is no doubt in the marker's mind that you know this piece intrinsically well. You've studied it very closely. You can pick up on the inference, the nuances, the real fine details throughout. You are able to offer a cohesive evaluation of language, form and structure. That means you can intertwine some clever points about how the writer is using language or structure, all wrapped up within this form of a play to have an intended effect on the reader, on the audience. And remember, even though you're studying this text in class, you're reading it from a book, never lose sight of the fact that it was always written as a play. When Arthur Miller wrote A View from the Bridge, when J.B. Priestley wrote An Inspector Calls, they didn't write these texts with the intention that in 80, 90, 100 years' time, they would be read in book form or studied in classrooms around the world as exam text. They wrote them as performance pieces. They wrote them to have actors performing these roles. They wrote them to be performed on a stage in front of an audience. So always have that at the forefront of your mind. And the same goes for the literary heritage texts. Shakespeare, Austen, Dickens, they didn't write any of those things to be studied by GCSE students in classrooms. I don't think it would have even remotely registered that that was a possibility. These were meant to be pieces for entertainment. Okay, the AO1 and the AO2 feature again on the mark scheme for section B, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But in essence, take some time to read the questions carefully. Don't make too rash a decision in jumping to one or the other of these options, whichever text you've studied. Take time to make the best choice for you. The question I always get is, which of these are easier than the others? There isn't one that's easier than another. They are both equally weighted. The only difference is you and your response. So if you're not sure which to attempt, my advice would always be to do a quick plan, 5-minute plan, thinking through what you would say to this option, what you would say to that option. And in spending that 5 minutes thinking through what you would write, that will pay dividends when you come to make that choice and begin writing. If you don't do a plan, then there is every chance that you may write a really good first paragraph and then run out of ideas and then spend the next 5 to 10 minutes daydreaming, wasting time whilst your mind tries to get back on track. If you want me to do a video on planning, then that's something I'm thinking about doing. Drop me a comment below and that's something I might do in the future. Once you've spent 45 minutes on section A, you then come to section B, literary heritage. So again, depending on which of the texts you've studied for the literary heritage, you would go to the page on whichever that might be. So obviously you have some novels here, you have some Shakespeare plays. In the schools I've worked at, we tend to veer towards the Shakespeare plays. I don't know if that's the same for your centre. We presently do Macbeth, but I have done Romeo and Juliet in the not too distant past. So again, find the question on whichever of the texts you've studied, and you're looking at either the first option or the second again. The clue is there. Do not do both. Same amount of marks, so section A and section B are both equally weighted on 30 marks. If I was doing Macbeth, explore the significance of the supernatural, so that would be a theme question. Or how does Shakespeare present Duncan and his son Malcolm? So that would be character, theme, character. So again, on the day of the exam, you would have to make the best call, judgment call you can. Are you confident with the theme of the supernatural? If you were looking at Duncan and Malcolm and you're thinking, wow, they're relatively minor characters, my revision didn't focus too heavily on those, then maybe I should do the theme question. But again, 5-minute plan, scribble some ideas. Whenever I talk about planning, students seem to think I'm talking about drafting, and drafting takes time. No, by a plan, I mean a quick bullet point list. I'm a lister. It might be you're a mind mapper, or you do a quick brainstorm, mind map, whatever works for you. Just a 5-minute, get your ideas on the page to help you decide which of the two options you may go for. And again, there isn't one that's easier than another. The only difference here is which you are most comfortable with, which you are most knowledgeable about, which you have most to say about, based on your own revision and preparation. So again, I've got the mark scheme here for Romeo and Juliet. You will see that there is a whole host of indicative content for AO1, AO2 and AO4. So AO1 and AO2 are the same as with section A. But you might be asking, well, what is the AO3 bit? Well, AO4 bit, sorry. Well, again, I've highlighted at the top. So AO1 and AO2 are exactly the same for both sections. I'll put those side by side, you can see. So AO1 is your knowledge and understanding. AO2 is analysing language, form and structure. But the difference here, the addition, is the AO4, and that means context. So when you were studying whichever of the texts you were studying for section B, you should hopefully have been taught context. So for example, with Macbeth that I teach my students, we spend time looking at, for example, Elizabethan theatre, we look at the Great Chain of Being, we look at regicide, all of those kinds of ideas. If you were studying Romeo and Juliet, AO4, things about patriarchy, heads of family at the time the play was set, 13th century political factions, Shakespeare's influenced, some of his inspiration to write the play, conflict between parents and children, class structure in society, all of those kinds of things will contribute to your knowledge and understanding of context. So that's the key difference between the two. The assessment objectives are the same, but you will notice that the weighting for marks is slightly different. So for here where you have 15 marks and 15 marks for AO1 and AO2, here is 10 marks for AO1, 10 marks for AO2, and up to 10 marks for context. So do please make sure that you are including context, because if you don't, you're going to drop some useful marks. Again, for a level 5, that word there, assured knowledge, cohesive evaluation. And then this edition, understanding of the relationship between text and context is integrated convincingly into the response. So you are showing that you understand the life, the times, the influences, the inspiration, what was going on in the world around the time that your text was written. And the better you can do that, the higher up this mark scale you will go. Again, look at the difference in language. Assured for a level 5, thorough for a level 4, sound for a level 3, some knowledge for a level 2. Again, I'm not going to read everything on that mark scheme. You might want to pause the video and have a look at those descriptors. I hope that video has been useful to you. I hope it's calmed you down if you have your exam imminently. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel and share this video with any of your colleagues that might find this useful. Have a look at some of my other videos that will be linked here for any other help with language, literature, and I wish you all the very best with your forthcoming exams. See you next time.